Hello, fifth grade readers. Welcome to another episode of Reader's Workshop. I hope you are all enjoying your fantasy novels and maybe starting to look for some meaningful messages in the text. Today we're going to start with our read aloud, which is The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. And we are on chapter 9, which is What Do You Dream? And this is the image. Harvey didn't mention what had happened at the lake to anyone, not even Lulu, in part because he felt stupid for falling in, and in part because the house tried so hard to please him in the days that followed that he almost forgot about the accident entirely. That very night, in fact, he found a piece of colored string with his name tag on it at the base of the Christmas tree, and he followed it through the house to find a new bike, even more splendid than the one he'd lost 2 years before, waiting for him. But that was just the first of many fine surprises the Holiday House sprang in quick succession. One morning, for instance, Wendell and Harvey climbed up into the treehouse to discover that the branches around it were swarming with parrots and monkeys. Another day, in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, Mrs. Griffin called them through into the living room where the flames of the fire had taken on the shapes of dragons and heroes and were doing a fiery battle in the grate. And in the heat of one lazy afternoon, Harvey was wakened from a doze by a chorus of shouts and found a troupe of mechanical acrobats performing clockwork-defying defeats on the lawn. The greatest surprise, however, of all began with the appearance of one of Rictus's siblings. "My name is Jive," he said, stepping out of the early evening murk at the top of the stairs. Every muscle in his body seemed to be in motion, ticks, jigs, and jitterings that had wasted him away until he barely cast a shadow. Even his hair, which was a mass of oiled curls, seemed to hear some crazed rhythm. It writhed on his scalp in a knotted frenzy. "Brother Rictus sent me along to see how you're doing," he said, his tones succulent. "I'm doing fine," Harvey replied. "Did you say Brother Rictus?" "We're from the same brood, loosely speaking," Jive said. "I hope you call your folks now and then." "Yep," said Harvey. "I called them yesterday." "Are they missing you?" "Didn't sound like it." "Are you missing them?" Harvey shrugged. "Not really," he said. This wasn't strictly true. He had his homesick days, but he knew if he went back home he'd be in school the day after and wished he'd stayed longer in the Holiday House. A while longer. "You're going to make the most of being here then," said Jive, practicing a weird little dance step up and down the stairs. "Yeah," said Harvey. "I just want to have fun." "Who doesn't?" Jive grinned. "Who doesn't?" He sidled up to Harvey and whispered, "Speaking of fun." "What?" said Harvey. "You never did get Wendell back for that trick of his." "No, I didn't," said Harvey. "Why the heck not?" "I could never think of a way." "Oh, I'm sure we could cook something up between the two of us," Jive replied mischievously. "It has to be something he'll never think of," Harvey said. "That shouldn't be difficult," said Jive. "Tell me, what's your favorite monster?" Harvey didn't have to think hard about that. "A vampire," he said with a grin. "I found this great mask." "Masks are a good beginning," Jive said, "but vampires need to swoop out of the mist." He spread his arms, curling his long fingers like the claws of some eye-gouging beast. "Swoop down, snatch up their prey, then rise up again against the moon. I can see it now." "So can I," said Harvey, "but I'm not a bat." "So? So how would I swoop?" "Ah," said Jive, "we'll have Mar work on that for us. After all, what's a Halloween without a transformation or two?" He consulted the grandfather clock on the landing. "We've still got time to do it tonight. You go down and tell Wendell you'll meet him outside. I'll go up on the roof and find Mar. You meet us up there." "I've never been up on the roof." "There's a door on the top landing. I'll see you up there in a few minutes." "Well, I'll have to get my mask and coat and stuff." "You won't need a mask tonight," Jive said. "Trust me. Now you hurry up. Time's a wastin'." It took Harvey only a minute or two to tell Wendell to go on ahead. He was sure Wendell suspected something and was probably preparing some counterattack, but Harvey knew he and Jive had something up their sleeves. Even Wendell, expert on shock tactics though he was, couldn't anticipate. With the first part of the plan laid, he hurried upstairs again, found the door that Jive had mentioned, and climbed up onto the roof. Heights had never bothered him. He liked to be up above the world, looking down on it. "Over here," Jive called to him, and Harvey took off along the narrow walkway up the steep roof to find where his fellow conspirator stood. "Sure-footed," Jive observed. "No problem." "How about flying?" said a third voice as its owner stepped from the shadows of the chimney. "This is Mar," said Jive, "another of our little family." Unlike Jive, who looked nimble enough to walk on the eaves if the whim took him, Mar seemed to have slug blood in her somewhere. Harvey almost expected to see her fingers leave silver trails on the bricks that she touched, or see soft horns appear from her balding head. She was grossly fat, her flesh barely clinging to her bones. Wherever it could, around her mouth and eyes, at her neck and wrists, it collapsed in clammy folds. She reached out and poked Harvey. "I said, what about flying?" "What about it?" Harvey said, pushing her hand away. "Done much?" "Well, I flew to Florida once." "She doesn't mean in a plane," Jive told him. "Oh, in dreams, maybe?" said Mar. "Oh, yeah, I dream about flying." "That's good," Mar replied, grinning with satisfaction. She had not a single tooth in her mouth. Harvey looked at the empty maw in disgust. "You're wondering where they've gone, aren't you?" she said to Harvey. "Go on, admit it." Harvey shrugged. "Well, yeah, I am. Karna took them, the thieving brute. I used to have fine teeth, beautiful teeth." "Who's Karna?" Harvey wanted to know. "Never mind," Jive said, hushing Mar before she could reply. "Get to it or he'll miss the moment." Mar muttered something beneath her breath and then said, "Come to me, boy," extending her arms in Harvey's direction. Her touch was icy. "Feels weird, huh?" said Jive as Mar's fingers floated over his face, brushing it here and there. "Don't worry, she knows what she's doing." "And what's that?" "Changing you." "Into what?" "You tell her," Jive said. "It won't last long, so enjoy it. Go on, tell her about being a vampire." "Well, that's what I want Wendell to see," Harvey said. "A vampire," Mar said softly, her fingers pressing harder against his skin. "Yeah, I want to have fangs like a wolf and a red throat and white skin like I've been dead for 1,000 years." 2,000, said Jive. 10,000, said Harvey, beginning to enjoy this game. "And crazy eyes that can see in the dark, and pointy ears like a bat's ears." "Wait up," Mar said. "I've got to get all this right." Her fingers were working hard upon him now, as though his flesh were clay, and she was molding it. His face was tingling, and he wanted to reach up and touch it, but he was afraid of spoiling her handiwork. "And there's got to be fur," Jai observed. "Sleek black fur on his neck." Mar's hands dabbed at his throat, and he felt fur sprouting where she touched him. "And the wings," Harvey said. "Don't forget the wings." "Never," said Jive. "Spread your arms, boy," Mar told him. He did so, and she ran her hands along them, smiling now. "It's good," she said. "It's good." He looked down at himself, and to his astonishment, he found his fingers were gnarled and sharp, and leathery flaps were hanging from each of his arms. The wind gusted against them, threatening to carry him right off the roof then and there. "You know you're playing a dangerous game, don't you?" Mar said as she stood back to admire her handiwork. "You'll either break your head or scare the life out of your friend Wendell. Or both." "He won't fall, woman," Jive said. "He's got the knack of this. I can just tell by looking at him." He peered at Harvey with his squinty eyes. "Wouldn't be surprised if you weren't a vampire in another life, boy," he said. "Vampires don't have other lives," Harvey said, the words more difficult to say now that he had a mouthful of fangs. "They live forever." "That's right," said Jive, snapping his fingers. "So they do, so they do." "Well, I'm finished," said Mar. "You can get going, boy." The wind came gusting again, and if Jive hadn't been holding on to him as they walked the edge of the roof, Harvey would surely have been carried away. "There's your friend," Jive whispered, pointing down into the shadows. Much to his amazement, Harvey found that he could see Wendell quite clearly, even though it was pitch dark in the thicket. He could hear him, too, every little breath, every beat of his heart. "This is it," Jive hissed, putting his hand on Harvey's back. "What do I do?" Harvey said. "Do I flap or what?" "Jump," Jive said. "The wind'll take care of the rest. Either the wind or gravity." And with that, he shoved Harvey off the edge of the roof and into the empty air. So we'll read another chapter at the end of this lesson. Today I want to talk about the messages, the lessons that we learn from books that we read. And I want to start by talking about from books I remember from my childhood. And growing up, I was an avid reader. My first job, actually, I was 14 years old, and I was a freshman in high school, and I got a job working at the Glenview Library. So I was hired to put the books back on the shelves when people returned them. And it was so exciting because I loved books, and now I had a job that I was constantly around books. So I would, find new books to read all the time. One of my favorite stories when I was even younger, though, when I was about 7, I discovered a story called The Selfish Giant. And The Selfish Giant was written by a British author named Oscar Wilde. He lived a long time ago. And he had written this story about this giant and his garden and these children who would come into his garden to play. And I'm going to share that story with you now because it has a really strong message in it. And I think it's a message that's even important today, years after this story was written. So let me share my screen with you guys. I'm going to put me over here and I'm going to show you The Selfish Giant.
The Selfish Giant. Every afternoon after school, some children played in the large, beautiful garden of a huge, deserted castle. They rode in the long, soft grass, hid behind the bushes covered with blossom, and climbed trees where the birds sang sweetly. They were very happy there. One afternoon, they were playing hide-and-seek when they heard a great voice boom out. "What are you doing in my garden?" it roared. Trembling with fear, the children peered out of their hiding places to see a very angry giant. He had finally decided to come home after living for 7 years with his friend, the Cornish ogre. "I came back to my castle for some peace and quiet," he thundered. "I don't want to listen to a lot of children laughing and shouting. Get out of my garden and don't come back." So the children ran away as fast as their legs would carry them. "This garden belongs to me and nobody else," the giant mumbled to himself. "I shall make sure that nobody else can use it." So he built a high wall all around it, with sharp iron spikes on top. In the wall was a great iron gate, and on the gate the giant put a notice. "Keep out," it read. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." Every day the children poked their noses through the bars of the gate and looked longingly at the garden. Then sadly they wandered off to play on the hard, dusty road. Soon the winter came. Snow covered the ground with a thick white mantle, and frost painted the trees silver. The north wind howled round the giant's castle, and hail pounded the window panes. "Oh, I long for the spring," the giant sighed, as he sat huddled by the fire. At last, spring came. The snow and the frost disappeared, and the flowers pushed their heads up through the ground. The buds on the trees opened, and the birds sang merrily, except in the giant's garden. There the snow, the frost, and the north wind still danced through the bare branches of the trees. "The spring has refused to come to this garden," they cried. "At last we have a place where we can stay forever." One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed, feeling very sorry for himself, when he heard a blackbird singing. He leapt over to the window and beamed with pleasure. The snow and the frost had gone, and every tree had burst into blossom. Every tree also held one of the children whom the giant had frightened away. They had crept into the garden, through a hole in the wall, and the spring had rushed in after them. Only one child was still standing on the ground. He was a boy who was crying bitterly because he was too small to reach even the lowest branch of the smallest tree. The giant was moved to pity. "How selfish I have been," he said to himself. "Now I see why the spring wouldn't come to my garden. I'll knock down the walls and turn it into a children's playground. But first I'll put that poor little boy on top of a tree." The giant crept down the stairs and into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened they ran away again. Only the little boy, whose eyes were so full of tears that he could not see the giant coming, stayed where he was. As the winter returned to the garden, the giant gently picked up the boy. "There's no need to cry," he murmured softly, and he placed the boy on top of the nearest tree. Immediately the tree burst into blossom, and the boy flung his arms around the giant's neck and kissed him. When the children saw that the giant was kind and friendly, they came running back into the garden, through the hole in the wall, followed by the spring. The giant laughed happily and joined in their games, only stopping to knock down the walls with an axe. It was sunset before he realized that he had not seen the small boy for some time. "Where is your little friend?" he asked anxiously. But the children did not know. Every day after school, the children came to play in the giant's beautiful garden. Every day the giant asked them the same question: "Is the little boy with you today?" And every day the answer was the same: "We don't know where to find him. The only time we've ever seen him was the day you knocked down the wall." The giant felt sad because he loved the little boy very much. Only the sight of the children playing made him happy again. The years passed quickly, and the giant grew old and weak. Soon he could no longer play with all the children. One winter morning, he was sitting by his bedroom window when he suddenly saw the most beautiful tree he had ever seen, standing in a corner of the garden. Its golden branches were covered with delicate white blossom and silver fruit, and underneath them stood the little boy. "He's come back at last," the giant said joyfully. Forgetting how weak his legs were, he rushed down the stairs and hurried across the garden. But as he reached the little boy, his face became red with anger. "Who has hurt you?" he cried. "Why can I see the marks of nails on your hands and feet? Old and feeble as I am, I'll kill the people who have done this to you." Then the child smiled gently and said, "Hush, don't be angry, but come with me." "Who are you?" whispered the giant, falling to his knees. "A long time ago, you let me play in your garden," the child replied. "Now I want you to come and play in mine. It's called paradise." That afternoon, when the children ran into the garden to play in the snow, they found the dead giant lying peacefully under a tree. all covered with white blossom.
All right, so that's the story of the selfish giant. And I remember that story from when I was a boy, a long, long time ago. But it's always made an impact on me. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like you to just pause this video and I'd like you to talk and maybe just discuss with your teachers what you think the message was. What was the life lesson in that story? And I know there's some religious symbolism you might have noticed, but I'm talking about what lesson do you think Oscar Wilde wanted people to get from that story? Okay, so pause the video and discuss that now. Okay, so all of us have grown up with different stories. I know your teachers can probably tell you other stories that they read as kids that they really got a lot out of. But I'd like you to think about that for yourselves. I want you to think about, as we're reading fantasy stories, these fantasy stories, might have these fantastic plots and these amazing characters with magic and powers, but they also have themes. They also have life lessons that the author wants you to learn. So that's what I want us to focus on today. I want us to focus on looking for life lessons in stories that we've heard or stories that we've read. And I'm going to start by showing you what I call it a textual lineage. Okay, and I'm going to then give you an opportunity to create something similar. But let me show you mine first. Okay, so I'm going to move me over to the side here, and I'm just going to show you this nice and big. Okay, so this is a textual lineage. It's the lessons I've learned from different books that I've read. Okay, and the way I did this is I just thought of some books from my past, and then I kind of put them in this kind of I wanted to do something a little bit more artistic. So I have the different books, and then I use different colors, and then I put the lesson here. So one of the earliest books I remember as a kid reading is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. And if you know this story, you'll know what it's about. But if you don't, you should read it. It's a beautiful story. And I learned that the lesson in that is that giving of yourself or giving of ourselves is the best form of kindness. Another book I remember from growing up is Homecoming by Cynthia Voigt. This is about four kids who journey to find family together. And to me, the message in that was that family means everything, and sticking together with the people that you love is important. Another book I remember is Bridge to Terabithia. This is by Catherine Patterson. And Bridge to Terabithia is about a special friendship between a boy and a girl. And what I loved about it is that so often we don't think that boys and girls can be friends. And I learned a lesson that friends come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. That's what I learned from that book. You don't have to be boyfriend and girlfriend, or there doesn't have to be romantic friendship. It can just be friends. Another book I remember from growing up is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And in that book, you might be familiar with the movie, but it's a great book. I learned that everyday ordinary people can be heroes. And then finally, we're just reading The List now, and this is a new book that's part of now my textual lineage. And I learned that words have power. That's what I learned from The List. And I think the message is that words are powerful. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video now, and I want you to take about maybe 10 or 15 minutes and work on creating your own textual lineage. And then maybe you can find some time to share it with the people either in your fantasy book club group tomorrow, or you can find some time to share it. You don't have to make it like mine. I mean, you can if you want. You can make it like a timeline. You can make it like a chart. You can make it like just a list of books that are important. But remember, you're looking for books that you remember and the messages or the life lessons that you learned from those books. Okay, so pause the video and I'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, so today's lesson was all about finding life lessons in our text. And I'm going to just share this with you. I think it's this one. Give me a second here. No, this isn't the one. Sorry, let's try. Where is it now? Oh, I might not have it booted up. Give me 1 second. It might be in here. Reader's Workshop. Sorry about this. Here, Sophisticated Readers of Fantasy. Here it is. Let me just minimize this. And here we go. This is what I want to do to look at. So remember, we're looking at these different skills that we're learning. And last time we talked about reading metaphorically and looking for the dragons. And now here's today's lesson. Apply life lessons learned in fiction to our own lives. Okay, so it's important to remember that as you're reading your fantasy books, you're looking for these life lessons. Okay, and one thing that you can do is, as you're reading, is you can make a chart. Okay, and this is an example of one student's chart. So this student came up with the theme. Okay, and then wrote the theme at the top, so you can use a page of your reader's journal or your reader's notebook and write what you think the theme of your fantasy book is. And in this case, this reader said, "Ordinary people can be capable of great courage." And I think this is Gregor I think it's from Gregor the Overlander. And some of you might have read that book. I forget the author's name, and then what this student did, what this reader, 5th grade reader did, is gave examples from the text of how these two characters, Gregor and Isabel, show this life lesson that ordinary people can be capable of great courage. Okay, and made a list of the examples. So as you're reading your text, what you want to do is you want to maybe create something in your reader's notebook that does the same thing. You know, come up with what you think the theme might be. And once you've come up with what the theme might be, then you can list examples from the text that you think prove that theme. Okay, so I would like you to do that in your reader's notebook as you continue to read your fantasy novels. Okay, it's important to be looking for those life lessons and looking for those themes. Okay, we are going to end today with our read aloud with Thief of Always, another chapter, and that'll wrap up today's lesson. We are going to read chapter, I think it was, 11? No, 10. And this is where Harvey has just been pushed off the roof as a vampire to scare Wendell. So this is chapter 10, Falling from Grace. And this is the image. Okay, and here we go. The wind wasn't there to bear him up. He plummeted like a slate tossed from the gables, a cry of sheer terror escaping his throat. He saw Wendell turn, saw a look of mortal fear come upon his face, and then the wind came out of nowhere, cold and strong. Just as his leg brushed the bushes, he felt himself lift up toward the sky. His cry became a whoop, his terror, joy. The moon was larger than he'd ever seen it, and its vast white face filled his sight like the face of his mother, bending to kiss him good night. Except that he needed no sleep tonight. No, nor a mother to wish him sweet dreams. This was better than any dreams, flying with the wind in his wings and the world shuddering below in a fear of his shadow. He looked for Wendell again and saw him fleeing for the safety of the house. No, you don't, he thought, and turning his wings like leathery sails, he swooped down upon his prey. A blood-curdling shriek filled his ears, and for a moment he thought it was the wind. Then he realized it was his own throat that was uttering this inhumane din, and this shriek became laughter, wild, lunatic laughter. "Don't! Please, don't!" Wendell was sobbing as he ran. "Somebody help me! Somebody help me!" Harvey knew he'd already had his revenge. Wendell was frightened out of his wits. But it was too much fun to stop now. He liked the feel of the wind beneath him and the cold moon on his back. He liked the sharpness of his eyes and the strength of his claws. But most of all, he liked the fear he was causing. He liked the look on Wendell's upturned face and the sound of panic in his chest. The wind was carrying him down into the thicket, and as he landed, Wendell dropped to his knees, begging for mercy. "Don't kill me! Please, 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 I beg you, don't kill me!" Harvey had seen and heard enough. He'd had his revenge. It was time to put an end to this game before the fun soured. He opened his mouth to announce himself, but Wendell, seeing the red throat and the wolfish fangs, and thinking this meant certain death, began a new round of supplications. This time, however, he wasn't simply begging. "I'm too fat to eat, but there's another kid around here somewhere." Harvey growled at this. "There is," Wendell said, "I swear, and there's more meat on him than me." "Listen to the child," said a voice in the bushes at Harvey's side. He glanced around. There was Jive, his wiry form barely visible among the barbs. "He'd see you dead, young Harvey." Wendell heard none of this. He was still advertising the edibility of his friend, hoisting up his shirt and shaking his blubbery belly to prove how unpalatable he was. "You don't want me," he sobbed. "Take Harvey! Take Harvey!" "Bite him," said Jive. "Go on, drink a little of his blood. Why not? The fat's no good, but the blood's hot. The blood's tasty." He was doing a little dance as he spoke, stamping his feet to the rhythm of his chant. "Don't waste the taste. Go eat the meat." And still Wendell whined, all snot and tears. "You don't want me. Find Harvey. Find Harvey." And the more he sobbed, the more Jive's chant made sense to Harvey. Who was this ridiculous boy Wendell, anyway? He was too eager to serve Harvey up as dinner to be called a friend. He was just a tasty morsel. Any vampire worth his wings would chew off his head as soon as he looked at him. And yet, "What are you waiting for?" Jive wanted to know. "We've gone to all this trouble to make a monster of you." Yeah, but it's a game. It's just a game," Harvey said. "A game?" said Jive. "No, no, no, boy. It's more than that. It's an education." Harvey didn't know what he meant by this, and he wasn't altogether certain he wanted to know. "If you don't pounce soon," Jive hissed, "you're gonna lose him." It was true. Wendell's tears were clearing, and he was staring at his attacker with a puzzled look. Are you going to let me go?" he murmured. Harvey felt Jive's hand on his back. "Do it," Jive said. Harvey looked at Wendell's tear-stained face and trembling hands. If the situation had been reversed, he thought to himself, would I have been much braver? The answer he knew was no. "It's now or never," said Jive. "Then it's never," said Harvey. "Never." The word came out as a guttural roar, and Wendell fled before it, yelling at the top of his voice. Harvey didn't give chase. "You disappoint me, boy," Jive said. "I thought you had the killer instinct." "Well, I don't," said Harvey, a little ashamed of himself. He felt like a coward, even though he knew he'd done the right thing. "That was a waste of magic," said another voice, and Mar appeared from one of the bushes, her arms filled with enormous fungi. "Where'd you find those?" Jive said. "Usual place," Mara replied. She gave Harvey a contemptuous look. "I suppose you want your old body back?" she said. "Yes, please." "We should leave him like this. He'd get around to sucking blood sooner or later," said Jive. "Nah," said Mar. "There's only so much magic to go around. You know that. Why waste it on a miserable little punk like this?" She waved her hand casually in Harvey's direction, and he felt the power that had filled his limbs and transformed his face drain out of him. It was a relief, of course, to feel the magic unmade, but a little part of him mourned the loss. In a matter of moments, he was once again an earthbound boy, wingless and weak. With the spell removed, Mar turned her back on him and waddled off into the darkness. Jive, however, lingered long enough to have one last dig at Harvey. "You missed your chance there, kiddo," he said. "You could have been one of the greats." "It was a trick, that's all," Harvey said, concealing the strange unhappiness he felt. A Halloween trick. It meant nothing. There are those who disagree, said Jive. Those who'd say that all the great powers in the world are bloodsuckers and soul stealers at heart, and we must serve them, all of us, serve them to our dying day. He stared hard at Harvey all the way through this peculiar little speech, and then with a nimble step retreated into the shadows and was gone. Harvey found Wendell in the kitchen, a hot dog in one hand and a cookie in the other, telling Mrs. Griffin about what he'd seen. He dropped his food when Harvey came in and he yelped with relief, "You're alive! You're alive!" "Of course I'm alive," said Harvey. "Why shouldn't I be?" "There was something out there, a terrible beast. It almost ate me. I thought maybe it had eaten you." Harvey looked down at his hands and legs. "Nope," he said. "Not a nibble." I'm glad," Wendell said. "I'm so glad. You're my best friend. For always." "I was vampire food 5 minutes ago," Harvey thought. But he said nothing. Maybe there'd come a time when he could tell Wendell about this transformation and this temptation. But this wasn't it. He simply said, "I'm hungry." And he sat down at the table beside his fair weather friend to put something sweeter than blood into his belly. And with that, readers, I hope you continue to enjoy your fantasy books. I will see you next time, and off you go.